welcome back to our channel. Before you spend that quarter, take a second look. These might be worth way more than 25 cents. The 1965 quarter has rare transitional errors with silver planchets. Some have sold for thousands. The 1968 quarter? Certain no-s-proof errors are insanely valuable, and the 1983 quarter is famous for missing mint marks and high-grade examples worth serious money. Like this video and subscribe now. Your next rare coin might already be in your pocket. The year was 1965, and the United States Mint was undergoing one of the most dramatic transitions in its history. Just a year earlier, in 1964, the nation had seen the last circulation of 90% silver coins. The rising cost of silver had forced the Treasury's hand, and by mid-1965, all new dimes, quarters, and half-dollars would be produced without the precious metal. In its place came a new, clad, composition, layers of copper and nickel fused over a pure copper core. The shift was economical, logical, necessary. But in the flurry of change, something unexpected slipped through the cracks, something that would go unnoticed for years. Quarters dated 1965 were not supposed to contain a trace of silver. That much had been clear. The Mint had announced it publicly, and coinage procedures had been revised. Silver planchets, once used for Washington quarters, were to be entirely phased out. And yet, within this transitional fog, a few anomalies emerged: coins bearing the 1965 date but with the unmistakable ring and shine of silver. At first, these whispers were dismissed. People assumed it was wishful thinking, the remnants of earlier dated coins being mistaken for newer issues. But then came the confirmations that in a quiet town in Nevada, a collector named Nora Fielding received a handful of change from a gas station, nothing out of the ordinary. But when she dropped the coins into her ceramic dish at home, she heard a sound that made her freeze. A sharp, bright, high-pitched ring, the kind she hadn't heard from coins in over a year. She pulled the quarter from the pile and turned it over in her hand. It gleamed with an unusual luster. The reeded edge lacked the telltale orange streak of the new clad coins. Instead, it was a clean silver gray, consistent all around. The date read, 1965. She compared it with other quarters in her wallet. There was no denying the difference. Intrigued, she took it to a local coin shop. The owner, a former Navy officer and part-time appraiser, tested the coin sound against a clad quarter. The silver one rang true, just like the old 1964s. His curiosity deepened. He weighed it, 6.25 grams, identical to the silver quarters minted the year before. He ran his thumb along the rim again. No copper core. No mistake. Word of Nora's find spread quickly. But instead of celebration, the reaction was quiet, almost cautious. Dealers didn't know what to make of it. Could it be a fake? A coin struck from leftover silver stockpiles? Or perhaps a test strike that had slipped through? There was no official record of silver planchets being used in 1965 production, at least not intentionally. The Mint had made a clear and decisive cut. Yet this coin stood in defiance of that. The theory that took hold among experts was simple yet remarkable: a small number of silver planchets intended for 1964 dated quarters had remained in the Mint's hoppers or storage bins and were accidentally fed into the presses used for 1965 coinage. The planchets were indistinguishable in size from the new clad blanks, and under the intense production quotas of the time, a few slipped through, carrying with them an outdated alloy under a New Year's stamp. Other examples began surfacing in scattered regions. A man in New Jersey found one in a laundromat. A young girl in Oregon was given one by her grandmother and nearly spent it at a school vending machine. In each case, the coin was set aside, inspected, and eventually verified. They all bore the same characteristics: struck in 1965, weighing 6.25 grams, and clearly composed of 90% silver. As word spread among serious collectors, so did the intensity of the search. People hoarded rolls of 1965 quarters, pouring through them with scales, magnets, and bright lights. The key was weight. Silver quarters were slightly heavier than their clad counterparts, and the absence of a copper core was a dead giveaway. But few were lucky enough to find them. The number of known 1965 silver quarters remained extremely low, each one a relic of a fleeting minting era wrapped in historical transition. For collectors, it was a dream scenario. These coins weren't errors in the traditional sense. They bore no dramatic misstrike, no visible doubling, no off-center blurs. They were perfect in form and appearance, only their metal betrayed them. And that made them even more desirable. A coin that was never meant to exist, struck legally yet accidentally, in a metal that had officially been retired. The market responded with steady curiosity at first, then with surging demand. Early examples were traded privately, sold for modest premiums to knowledgeable collectors who sensed their long-term potential. But once grading agencies authenticated the first batch, and once auction houses began including them in rare coin lots, their value accelerated. What once was an overlooked piece of pocket change became the subject of fierce bidding wars. One of the most famous examples was uncovered in 1999 by a retired railroad worker in Kansas. He had kept it for years in a tobacco tin, simply because it looked shinier than the others. When he finally brought it to a coin show, it was immediately recognized and authenticated. The coin, nearly pristine and uncirculated, drew national attention. Its sale at auction exceeded all expectations and sparked renewed interest in the 1965 silver quarter. Then, an unexpected twist added another layer to the story. A researcher at the American Numismatic Association unearthed an internal mint memo from early 1965 suggesting that silver planchets were not completely exhausted until several weeks into the new coinage year. Though no mention of 1965 dated silver coins was made, the memo hinted at logistical confusion during the transition period. It wasn't conclusive proof, but it gave credibility to the theory that a handful of silver blanks may have been caught in the system, only to re-emerge under new dyes. Despite the passage of time, no complete list of known 1965 silver quarters exists. Their discovery remains a matter of luck, of timing, of holding history in hand without even realizing it. Most are found by chance. A coin jar cleaned out. An old change drawer. An estate sale where one piece gleams a bit brighter than the rest. Collectors continue to search. They know the signs. They know that among the 1.8 billion 1965 quarters struck, only a minuscule number defy the clad standard. These aren't merely coins, they are artifacts of change, of oversight, of a moment when the U.S. Mint looked to the future but left behind a silver whisper of the past. And today, a genuine 1965 Washington quarter struck on a silver planchet, in excellent condition and verified by experts, carries a value that ranges from $48,000 to $128,000. By 1968, the transition away from silver coinage was complete. The U.S. Mint had established a new norm: copper-nickel-clad coinage for dimes and quarters, with silver reserved only for select half-dollars and collector strikes. The silver age of American coins was firmly in the rearview mirror, or so it seemed. The quarter, a coin that had once held real purchasing power and been struck in 90% silver for over a century, was now reduced to a functional utility, stripped of precious metal, mass-produced in staggering quantities, and largely ignored by the public. But behind the scenes of this post-transition era, something unusual was unfolding at the Denver Mint. The minting process was precise, mechanized, and refined. But in any complex system, perfection is a goal, not a guarantee. In the case of the 1968 Washington quarter, one imperfection, a rare, almost impossible mistake, emerged to challenge what was thought to be a flawless system. A coin surface that should never have existed. At first glance, it looked like any other 1968 quarter. It bore the familiar profile of George Washington, the standard mottos, and the date that placed it squarely in the age of clad coinage. But the weight was wrong. The shine was wrong. And the edge, smooth and uniform with no visible copper, was completely, unmistakably silver. In a sleepy suburb outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, an elderly man named Elias Monroe had kept the coin tucked away in a wooden drawer for decades. He remembered receiving it in change at a train station in late 1968 and had saved it not because it looked different, but because he was one of those people who just didn't like spending quarters. The coin remained untouched until Elias passed away, and his grandson, Nolan, came across it while organizing the estate. It caught his attention not because of any visual difference, but because the weight of the quarter felt off. He had no idea why, but he set it aside with a few other odd-looking pieces. Later, while cleaning them with a soft cloth and holding them under warm light, Nolan noticed the 1968 quarter lacked something the others had: a copper core. Every other clad coin from that period had a visible sandwich pattern on the edge, the telltale reddish-brown line of copper. But this one did not. Its edge was silver all the way through, clean and uninterrupted. He weighed it using a friend's digital scale. The result: 6.25 grams. Exactly what a pre-1965 silver quarter would weigh. But this one clearly said 1968. He brought it to a local coin shop. The dealer raised his eyebrows immediately. There were number 1968 silver quarters, he said flatly, at least, not officially. They were all supposed to be clad. But he offered to send it off for analysis, just in case. A few weeks later, the results came in, struck on a 90% silver planchet. Certified. Authenticated. Real. Nolan was stunned. So was the dealer. And once word spread to collectors online, a storm of speculation erupted. How could it have happened? Theories varied. Some believed the coin had been struck using a leftover silver planchet from before 1965, perhaps one that had been misplaced and somehow resurfaced. Others suggested that a silver planchet intended for a special collector coin, such as a 40% silver half-dollar or a proof piece, was mistakenly fed into the quarter press at the Denver Mint. Whatever the cause, the effect was undeniable. A coin meant to be part of the modern clad era had been born in silver, making it an ultra-rare outlier with no official acknowledgement or precedent. Collectors began examining their own 1968 quarters more closely. While a few circulated examples began to appear with faint variations in tone or edge pattern, very few matched the characteristics of Nolan's find. The silver strike was clean, sharp, and brilliant, an unmistakable signal that something extraordinary had occurred. Another example turned up a year later in Ohio, discovered by a coin roll hunter who had gone through thousands of quarters looking for minor errors. When he came across the 1968 D quarter that weighed too much and had no visible copper on the edge, his instincts told him not to dismiss it. After verification, it was confirmed to be the same anomaly, a 1968 silver planchet used on a clad design quarter die. The fact that both of these coins bore the Denver Mint mark was more than coincidence. It suggested the error was isolated to that facility, possibly from a rogue planchet bin or a misfeed during the production of special mint sets or commemoratives. Grading agencies began tracking these anomalies, assigning them their own pedigree as transitional errors. The term carried weight in numismatic circles. Transitional errors are coins minted using either old planchets with new dies or vice versa, products of changing technology or shifting materials. They represent moments of flux, of human error in the face of mechanical routine. And they are almost always rare. The rarity of the 1968 silver quarter was not just in its accidental composition but in the timing. By 1968, the U.S. Mint had spent years working to eliminate such crossovers. Strict inventory controls, refined sorting systems, and metal segregation procedures were in place. The idea that a silver planchet could still be lying around, unnoticed, and then be struck, was astounding. And that added to the coin's mystique. Collectors pursued them with increasing zeal. Auction houses began listing them as headline pieces in modern error categories. One such quarter, in near mint condition with minimal circulation marks and deep luster, sold for tens of thousands at a major event in Chicago. Another, with moderate wear but unmistakable silver tone and edge characteristics, was privately sold to a museum collection that focused on transitional coinage and minting anomalies. Stories began circulating about mysterious third and fourth examples turning up in estate collections, tucked away for decades. Each was scrutinized, weighed, examined under microscopes, and submitted for authentication. Only those that passed every test, weight, appearance, metal composition, and historical plausibility, earned the full confidence of the numismatic community. The consensus? Fewer than a dozen verified examples were known to exist. The rest of the 1968 quarters, over 200 million of them, were perfectly normal. These few were anomalies frozen in time. The twist that captivated collectors most came in the form of a declassified mint document from late 1967, uncovered by a researcher combing through federal archives. It referenced a batch of non-standard blanks misrouted during Denver preparation. Though the document never mentioned the quarter directly, or silver planchets by name, its timing and origin gave further credibility to the theory that a small number of silver blanks had been improperly sorted during the conversion between years. Whether those blanks were ever intended for quarters, or were simply thrown into the wrong hopper, remains unknown. But the outcome is beyond dispute. Today, if a 1968 quarter lacks the copper edge, weighs 6.25 grams, and exhibits the crisp tonal resonance of silver, collectors take notice. They know what it could mean. They know how rare it is. And they know that even the most ordinary coin can hold an extraordinary secret. Decades after it was minted, an authenticated 1968 US $quarter coin struck on a silver planchet now holds a value that ranges from $42,000 to $118,000 depending on its condition, strike clarity, and provenance. In 1983, the United States Mint was recovering from one of the most challenging economic chapters in modern coinage history. The early 80s had brought a deep recession, rising inflation, and budget constraints that affected every level of federal operation, including coin production. Collectors who had taken for granted the routine annual mint sets were disappointed to find that no uncirculated mint sets were issued in 1982 or 1983. As a result, the only way to obtain coins from these 2 years was through circulation. This decision, born from cost-cutting, created a scarcity ripple effect that would take years to fully emerge. But among all the quarters minted in 1983, one specific anomaly slipped through unnoticed. At first, it appeared no different than the rest, until a sharp-eyed collector found something peculiar beneath its surface. The coin came from a roll purchased at a flea market in Oklahoma. Jason Hill, a passionate roll hunter and part-time coin enthusiast, often scoured yard sales, pawn shops, and flea markets in hopes of finding overlooked treasures. When he cracked open a tightly wrapped roll of 1983 quarters, he expected nothing more than some heavily circulated pocket change. But one coin instantly stood out, not because of any glaring flaw, but because the surface seemed subtly wrong. The strike appeared weak, yet oddly swollen in places. The letters on United States of America looked puffy and soft, and the detail on George Washington's hair lacked the usual sharpness. At first, he thought it was simply worn or struck from worn dies. But as he examined the reverse, he noticed something that gave him pause. The eagle's feathers, which normally show fine detail and crisp lines, were oddly rounded and faded. Still, it wasn't the fading that truly caught his attention. It was the texture. The coin felt unusually smooth, almost glossy in parts, but not from polish. He knew enough about minting errors to suspect something more serious, a wrong planchet. He weighed the coin. It came in slightly under the usual 5.67 grams, which sent a chill through his fingers. It was too light for a clad quarter. Intrigued, he decided to send the coin for testing. Weeks later, the results confirmed what no one had suspected. The coin had been struck on a copper-cent planchet. A quarter-size design, pressed onto a planchet meant for a penny. The implications were startling. The copper planchet, thinner and smaller than a standard quarter blank, had slipped into the wrong feed during production. It was a rare, freak occurrence, especially considering the security protocols in place at the mint. Yet it had happened. Somehow, in the high-pressure machinery of the Philadelphia Mint, a copper penny blank found its way beneath quarter dies and was struck with Washington's image. Because the copper-cent planchet was smaller in both diameter and weight, the design of the quarter didn't fit properly. Parts of the rim were cut off, lettering was incomplete, and the strike pressure caused the details to puff outward unnaturally. This created the soft, swollen look Jason had noticed, a telltale sign of a wrong planchet error. Collectors were instantly captivated. Wrong planchet errors were already rare, but this one came with a twist. It wasn't a silver planchet or a foreign metal, but something even more bizarre, a domestic coin blank from a completely different denomination. These types of errors were almost impossible to spot unless the strike was deep enough to hold major details, yet off enough to betray its origin. Another example surfaced in Florida a year later. discovered by a woman sorting through her late father's coin jars. She thought she had a discolored quarter, perhaps stained by time or environment. But a dealer quickly identified it as something much more, a 1983 quarter struck on a copper planchet. When weighed and authenticated, it confirmed the same anomaly: misfed copper cent blank struck with quarter dies. She had unknowingly held a valuable error coin for decades, mistaking it for junk. A third piece, even more dramatic, was discovered in California. This one bore a dramatic off-center strike, further proving that not only was the wrong planchet used, but that it had been misaligned in the press. These errors were striking not just in rarity, but in appearance. One glance revealed that they were far from ordinary. The root cause remained speculative. During the early 80s, with staffing cuts and pressure to meet production quotas, quality control occasionally slipped. The mints were operating under tight schedules with aging equipment, and planchet sorting, normally a meticulous process, was occasionally compromised by speed. It's believed that a small batch of copper cent blanks, destined for penny presses, found their way into quarter hoppers during a shift change or material transfer. These errors escaped detection during routine sorting and found their way into general circulation. They were never intended for collectors, never made as proofs, and never included in sets. Their very existence challenged the idea that a coin must be pristine or intentional to be valuable. Instead, they embodied the idea that imperfection could be priceless, but the story doesn't end with the wrong planchet. In 1983, the absence of mint sets created a vacuum of high-quality strikes from that year. Nearly all 1983 coins were found only in circulation, and most were heavily worn. That means any 1983 coin in brilliant uncirculated condition is already somewhat scarce. Add to that an error like the wrong planchet, and the result is a collector's perfect storm. Auction houses soon began watching for these anomalies. When the first fully graded and slabbed 1983 quarter-on-cent planchet error went to auction, the room buzzed with anticipation. Estimates were conservative, but the final hammer price far exceeded expectations. The buyer, a well-known error coin collector, described it as the kind of mistake that could only happen once in a million strikes. The numismatic community rallied around the coin's story. It wasn't just a minting mishap, it was a glimpse into the chaos and pressure inside the mint during a recession-era economy. A moment when machinery, manpower, and material all collided to produce something unintentional, but unforgettable. Collectors today scan their change with fresh eyes. A slightly reddish tint on a 1983 quarter. A coin that feels too light. Lettering that looks swollen or compressed. These subtle clues may point to a buried treasure hiding in plain sight. And while most 1983 quarters are worth face value, a rare few tell a different story, a story of error, survival, and discovery, because a genuine 1983 US quarter struck on a copper cent planchet, authenticated and in collectible condition, now commands a value between $35,000 and $104,000.